Welcome to the Show Me KC Schools podcast. I'm Nina, and today we are joined by the fabulous Superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools, Dr. Collier. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. So we were wanting to put this podcast together to really have a resource for families to learn more about the general obligation bond that's going to be coming on the ballot in April 2025. And so I wanted to chat about that today. As we go through, sometimes I'll refer to it as the GO bond. So I just want to give that disclaimer that we're talking about the same thing. If I switch to GO bond or general obligation bond, it's the same thing.
Got it.
All right. So let's go ahead and jump right in. For those of us that are not really familiar with what a GO bond is, can you just kind of level set us and let us know what that is?
Yes. A GO bond or a GO bond is actually the primary funding mechanism for a school district per se to generate the funds needed to address infrastructure needs across that district, which could be renovations, it could be new buildings, it could be fixing up just ongoing maintenance and those kinds of things. But that's typically the way any school district, most school districts across our nation fund the upkeep of their buildings.
Is through those?
Is through that GO bond.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. And there's a reason why many of us don't know what that is who grew up in the Kansas City area. Can you talk a little bit about the last time we had one of these bonds for a Kansas City Public School District?
Absolutely. It has been a very long time, and there has not been any conversation really about the bond for many years. The last time we passed a bond was 1967. So it's been about 58 years since we have generated those dedicated funds to address our building needs, our facilities.
Mm-hmm. That is insane. As somebody who grew up in Kansas City, went to a public school, it's just disheartening that that's the last time well before I was born, we had that to help our buildings. Why do you think now is the time that we have this on the ballot, that we vote yes for the GO bond?
Well, I mean, I think the first reason why this is very important is because we have failing infrastructure across our district. We have students and staff and buildings all across the district. However, many of our buildings are not in good condition. Because we've not had that flow of dedicated funds, we've not been able to address many of those needs that have accumulated over the years, which has put us now at about $650 million of deferred maintenance. And the way that we've been addressing the most pertinent needs over the years has been to really take money that should be going into classrooms and into schools and kind of putting a portion aside, not enough, but putting a portion aside so that we can kind of patch up things here and there. And we all know in our own homes, if you patch up over time, eventually
it's going to become a bigger issue.
It's going to become a bigger issue, and things are going to crumble. And so I think that is probably the most pressing reason why I think now is the time. The other thing is, I think people really need to know that Kansas City Public Schools is not the district of 20, 30 years ago, that we are a district that is worth investing in. We regained our accreditation in 2022, which we're super proud about. A lot of hard work went into that. But not only did we earn our accreditation, we have maintained it. This last round of APR scores, we saw our highest APR rate that we've seen in many years. And we had significant growth in a particular area that's very important to me, and that is literacy in reading. And since I stepped into this role as superintendent, that's one of the things that I've emphasized, because I think it's incredibly important that every child that matriculates through our schools is able to read, write, and effectively communicate. Absolutely. I don't believe we've done our job well if we failed in that area. And so when I look at our data, I can clearly see that we had a lot of work to do, but I'm so proud of the work we've done over the last few years and seeing that growth in particular that we made in this last year. We had significant growth, so much so that we saw that we closed gaps for every subgroup across our district. There were no student groups that did not grow, and there were no student groups that didn't close the gap with the state. So we know that we're doing the right work. We know we're heading in the right direction. And so I want people to know that we are worth investing in. We're doing the hard work that we need to do as a district.
Can you talk a little bit about how you all identify and prioritize the building infrastructure and maintenance that needs to be done, and how you plan on using the funds from the GO bond to address those things.
So one of the first things that we did, we didn't just jump in and say, we want to do this or do that. Of course, we all have ideas, but we had an assessment done of all buildings across our districts so we can really get a sense of where is our deferred maintenance? Where do we have large amounts of deferred maintenance? What are the building conditions? And then also, what are our educational suitability needs? So when we say that, we're talking about the classroom spaces, the collaboration spaces that we'd like to see in buildings, places where the teaching and learning is happening. How well are those situated, or what condition are those areas, are they in across our buildings? So we had a lot of data that we looked at to make determinations about where we needed to address needs. And of course, we have to prioritize because, as I said earlier, our need is $650 million of deferred maintenance alone. So we can't do everything,
right?
But we are trying to target all the places where we see we have the greatest needs and where we see we have some of the lowest building condition scores. Trying to take care of those, get some of those offline, doing some new builds, doing some relocations, doing co-location, to really address some of those issues that we're seeing.
Okay, and just to kind of help level set for our listeners, could you share the average age of a KCPS building?
Yes, the average age of KCPS buildings is 60 years old,
Wow.
And we have quite a few that are over 100 years old.
Wow. I don't think people realize that. Sometimes you just kind of get into the routine of the day-to-day and your kids going to school and you don't quite stop and think about how old some of these buildings are. I know some of the things people think about is okay, this is going towards buildings and possibly adding new things. And you mentioned new builds and deferred maintenance and things like that. Help our listeners understand what impact that has on students.
The impact is huge, and for a variety of reasons. Number one, there is research that supports students' learning trajectory being impacted by the conditions and the quality of the buildings that they're learning in. So that does make a difference. The lighting in the buildings, the heating and cooling systems. I mean, if you're in a building where it's cold in your classroom, or in the spring and summer where it's hot, which, as many people know, a couple years ago when we started school, first week of school, my first week as superintendent,
yes, I remember
we were the only district that had to call off school or call for a half day for an entire week because of the heat, because we didn't have central air in many of our buildings. That's unacceptable in 2025 or 24, whatever.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah.
But those are things that impacts students' ability to learn. No child is going to be focused when they don't have proper lighting, heating, cooling. But we also have to think about the social emotional side. What does it say to our children when they are going out for competition, sports and debate and all these other things, and they're going into these state-of-the-art buildings in other school districts right down the road?
Yeah. Close. Our neighbors.
And then they come back and they are reminded of the conditions of their buildings.
Yeah.
What is that saying to our children? What are the maybe unintended messages that we're delivering to them by allowing them to remain in those kinds of buildings? It does say something about their worth and their value. Why can't they have state-of-the-art buildings?
Right.
And so we want to make sure we're providing learning spaces that are commensurate with what our students are seeing all across the region, all across the state, all across the country.
Yeah.
Because like I said, passing a bond is pretty standard in most communities.
Right.
It's just that KCPS, in these boundaries, we have not done it in many years, and it's quite unusual.
Yeah. I know that the GO Bond is part of a larger Kansas City Public School District capital campaign. Can you talk a little bit more about what that full plan is and what else is included beyond just this bond?
Yeah. So, in this bond, this is sort of our first swipe at trying to address some of the needs. And we're asking voters for a $474 million bond. And I know that sounds huge. However, when we look at our needs across our district, that's our deferred maintenance, as well as addressing some of the building conditions around that educational suitability that I talked about, because we want to do more than just fix the heating and the cooling,
right?
And the roofs and the windows. That's great. But how do we address some of the aesthetics and the spacing and all of those things that we see in other buildings, how do we address those needs as well? That puts us at a funding need of $1.25 billion.
Wow.
So when you think about this bond at 474, that really is only scratching the surface around what we need.
Right.
So I know that sounds like a large ask, but it will allow us to begin to address some of our needs, but we'll have to continue to come back. And what we hope to do over time, because we do not want to be a burden on taxpayers. That's not what we want, because actually that affects many of our families too. What we will probably be able to do in the future, as we're paying down the debt for the bond, we'll be able to come back and say we're going to have a no tax increase bond, which is what many communities do in order to maintain their buildings. But we'll continue to do that over time and continue to seek out other funding streams so we can address those other needs that we won't be able to address in this particular bond.
Okay. For our listeners, community members that want to get involved, want to learn more about not just the bond, but the full 10-year capital plan, what can they do to get involved?
So there's several things. Our communications engagement team and others on the team have worked really hard. One, to involve our stakeholders early on in this process.
Yes.
So we're not waiting to now, but we have had community members, parents, other folks on our steering committee helping to guide us, helping us to make decisions about what the priorities will be, because we know that this is not something we should decide in isolation.
Right.
So we have done that work. But now for those who are really interested in maybe joining and who have not been a part, we would love for them to learn more about how to be an ambassador. And for us, an ambassador is simple. It's just, you can access the information on our website, learn about what the projects are, what our needs are, their talking points there, and just where people are in their circles of influence. Like, they don't have to schedule a special meeting if they're going to dinner with some friends or at church with, folks, wherever they are, or just with family on the holiday. Have conversations about what KCPS is doing and why we need this bond and what this would mean for our community. We also welcome folks to come visit our schools. I really think it's important for people to walk through our schools, to see the conditions of the building, but also to see the great things that are happening.
Yes.
Because, and I've said this many times as I've been out talking to people, so many people, when they think of Kansas City Public Schools, they're thinking of something 20 and 30 years ago. That is not who we are today.
Yes.
And they will come in our school and see some amazing things, some great achievements, wonderful students, amazing staff. And so I would love for folks to just come and become more acquainted with who we are today, but also come in and for themselves to assess what the needs are and to ask themselves the question, is this a school that I would want to send my children to? Just looking at the conditions, not what's going on inside,
but the
great
actual
things
building
happening inside, but
That's
just the
right.
building. Yeah. And another thing that I think why this bond is important and sometimes it's missed, because we're focusing a lot on the children, and we should, and their needs, because this is really about the kids that we serve here. But we can't forget the impact of this on staff.
Absolutely.
Because you need high quality staff in order to ensure that children can learn.
Right.
We just can't fill all of our classroom with substitutes and think that we're going to have the growth and the achievement that we want. But we know we're sitting in the middle of a national teacher shortage, and teachers have choices about where they're going to work. They can go down the street to work in that state-of-the-art building and get the same pay or more. Why would they choose us?
Right.
So if we want to make sure we're attracting high-quality staff, we need to make sure that we have buildings that are welcoming and inviting to our staff as well as our students.
Absolutely. And those resources mentioned with the website to learn more, we'll have all of that linked in our show notes for people who want to dig in a little deeper, learn some of the history, learn more about the plan. We'll have that available. We're going to give you a moment to just share out any final messaging or words that you want to share with listeners, parents, community members, as it relates to KCPS or the bond that's going to be coming up in April.
Yes. Well, thank you. This is really a wonderful opportunity for our city. It really is. We see that we're building stadiums, we're winning championships, and we're developing in so many ways. A city, Kansas City is on the map. But I know that there's more we're aiming for. And as we aim to be this world-class city, you can't do that by leaving an entire school district and a community behind.
That's right.
We have to go together. The quality of, or the success of a city is going to be really anchored in the success of that school district. And so as we think about our current ecosystem, when I say school system, We know that here in Kansas City, it's not just Kansas City Public Schools.
Right.
We know that we also have many charters in our schools that serve Kansas City's children. And to be perfectly honest, many of the children are kind of coming in and out our schools.
Right.
So Kansas City Public Schools' position is that all the children are important to us. All the schools in our community are important to us. And many people view charters as competition with us, and maybe they are. But I think that we have to move beyond this thinking around we're competition and think about how do we serve all children well in this community, which is why we extended the offer to charters in our community to be a part of this bond. We know we have great needs and we could use every bit of it.
Right.
But we also have to think about our charter schools as well. And so we did extend that offer, and there are 9 charter schools that are joining us in the pursuit of this bond. And we're really grateful for those partners.
That's awesome.
We're excited about the work that will happen in those buildings. They have amazing leaders. They have a heart for kids. They're trying to do the right thing for kids. And we're just excited about joining arms and working together to make this happen for Kansas City's kids. And so I would just encourage those who are listening to learn more about what we're doing, to really consider the long-term impact of this, how this not only addresses the needs that we have currently, but what does this mean for Kansas City long-term?
Right.
You know, what does this mean for our city? Because as we invest in Kansas City's children, we are making a major investment in this city. We are building the workforce that we need for the future. But we cannot do that without the support of our entire city. So I'm just excited about where we're going. I'm very hopeful. There's been a lot of positivity around the bond and just great momentum. And so I'm just grateful for all who've already joined us and partnered with us and looking for others to be a part of this amazing effort, really this historical effort.
Very historic.
Yes, because this is now ushering us in potentially into a new era in Kansas City.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us and
Absolutely.
sharing. We will include resources in the show notes for folks that want to get involved or want to find out more information. Dr. Collier, thank you so much for coming and talking about the bond. Continue to stay tuned in to Show Me KC Schools podcast, and we'll see you next time. Show Me KC Schools is committed to providing you with vital information that supports you while you support your child on their educational journey. Connect with us on social media at SMKCS and on YouTube at Show Me KC Schools and on all your favorite podcast platforms.